Why is it that those who carry kindness in their hearts, those who walk gently in the world, so often become the targets of ridicule, betrayal, and social attack? It seems unfair, almost paradoxical, that the people who least deserve harm often receive the greatest share of it. Yet history, literature, and our own lives reveal this as a recurring pattern. The compassionate teacher mocked by students, the generous leader betrayed by allies, the gentle friend dismissed by those he has helped. These are not rare exceptions, but common truths of human existence. To understand why good people suffer more, we must look deeper than surface appearances. The attacks they face are not random. They are reflections of psychological dynamics within society, projections of human shadow, and evidence of the discomfort goodness creates in those unprepared to face it. Let us uncover 5 reasons behind this phenomenon, so that those who walk the path of goodness may recognize their struggles not as weakness, but as proof of their strength. Goodness carries with it a peculiar burden, a weight that is not always obvious to the one who bears it. To live with integrity, with kindness, and with moral clarity is not simply to walk through life unscathed, admired by all. Rather, it is often to walk into the storm, to arouse discomfort and hostility from those whose lives are bound by unacknowledged shadows. Every human being holds within themselves both light and darkness, and the meeting of another's light does not always inspire warmth. More often it provokes unease, for the light reveals what had long been hidden in the recesses of the soul. When goodness appears, it becomes a mirror, and in that reflection, others are confronted not merely with what they admire, but also with what they lack, with what they have neglected, and with what they fear to face in themselves. Think of the whistleblower who dares to speak against corruption in a company or government. Rarely are they received as heroes at first. They are silenced, ridiculed, or punished. Their courage, their refusal to collude with falsehood, becomes unbearable to those around them who would prefer to look away. Their very existence reveals the cowardice or complicity of others, and instead of facing that truth, people turn against the one who exposes it. What we see here is not a rational rejection of goodness, but a psychological defense. When a person's integrity shines too brightly, it awakens shame and fear in others, who then attack the source of that illumination rather than confront their own shadows. This pattern is not confined to dramatic moments of public life. It exists quietly in everyday human relationships. Consider the friend who chooses honesty when others would rather remain silent. In a group that thrives on gossip, slander, or complaint, the one who refuses to participate becomes an uncomfortable reminder of conscience. Their restraint is not seen as admirable, but as judgmental, as though their silence itself were a condemnation. Or think of the colleague who refuses to cut corners at work. Their adherence to principle highlights the laziness or dishonesty of others, and instead of changing their ways, the others find it easier to ridicule the one who holds the line. Goodness unsettles because it cannot help but awaken comparison. It shines a light that asks an unspoken question, "Why are you not living this way too?" And that question is unbearable to many, because to answer it would require change, effort, and courage. Instead, people choose resentment. They project their discomfort outward, transforming the good person into the enemy. This is the paradox of light. It is both a source of guidance and a cause of resistance. One might think that goodness should naturally attract love and admiration, but in truth, it is just as likely to attract hostility. Look at the lives of history's great moral figures. Socrates was sentenced to death not for evil deeds, but for his commitment to truth, which exposed the ignorance of his fellow Athenians. Jesus was crucified not because he preached hatred, but because his love revealed the hypocrisy of the powerful. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated not because he sowed division, but because his dream of justice laid bare the cruelty of an unjust system. Each of these figures embodied a light so powerful that it forced others to see themselves clearly, and many could not bear it. This dynamic operates within each of us as well. Imagine a workplace where one employee consistently gives their best effort, treating others with respect and going beyond what is required. For some, this inspires admiration, but for others, it awakens insecurity. They begin to whisper, to criticize, to find fault where there is none. He's trying too hard. She's only doing it to get noticed. What is happening here is projection. The envy and inadequacy within others are cast outward, turning goodness into a provocation. The one who simply acts from integrity becomes a target, not because of any wrong, but because they reveal truths others are unwilling to confront. At a deeper level, this reveals something essential about the human psyche. We are not comfortable with too much light, for light dissolves illusion. Illusions protect us from our own inner contradictions, from our unresolved wounds, and from the parts of ourselves we would rather deny. When a good person enters the room, they carry with them an energy that quietly challenges those illusions. Their presence whispers, "There is another way to live." And for many, this is not comforting. It is threatening. The tragedy is that goodness often suffers for the very thing it offers. The person who chooses kindness over cruelty may be dismissed as weak. The one who insists on honesty may be excluded as difficult. The individual who forgives instead of retaliating may be ridiculed as naive. But what is really happening is that their goodness is reflecting shadows that others would rather not see. In this sense, the hostility directed toward them is less about who they are, and more about what they awaken in others. Think of a candle placed in a dark room. At first, it seems small and fragile compared to the vastness of the darkness. Yet the flame reveals corners that had long been hidden. Dust, dirt, and decay that were once invisible become visible, and those who had grown comfortable in the dark may not thank the candle for its light. They may even wish to extinguish it, preferring the safety of shadows to the discomfort of truth. This is the plight of good people. Their light does not merely illuminate, it disrupts. Yet there is hope in this understanding. For those who suffer because of their goodness must realize that the attacks they endure are not signs of failure, but signs of impact. If their presence provokes discomfort, it is because their light is working. If their integrity awakens resentment, it is because it has touched the very places others have long hidden from themselves. The suffering they endure is not meaningless. It is the natural consequence of carrying a mirror in a world where many fear to see their own reflection. To live as a good person, then, is to accept this burden with courage. It is to recognize that hostility is often the shadow's cry, not the soul's judgment. It is to remember that while many may reject the light in the moment, that same light may one day guide them out of darkness. Just as the whistleblower once silenced may later be honored for their courage, so too does every act of integrity plant a seed in the human spirit, a seed that may take years to grow but can never be destroyed. The challenge is immense and the suffering real, but the truth remains. Goodness does not merely coexist with the world, it transforms it. And transformation, by its very nature, provokes resistance. Those who embody goodness must not mistake resistance for failure. They must see it for what it is, the shadow's last defense against the light. In the strange logic of human interaction, those who embody gentleness are often the ones upon whom the heaviest blows fall. This paradox is as old as humanity itself. The cruel, the manipulative, the domineering, these figures often inspire fear. Fear, in turn, creates distance. Few dare to confront or provoke them, for the risk feels too high. But the good, the kind, the compassionate, they radiate an openness, a softness, a willingness to embrace rather than to wound. And tragically, that very quality makes them vulnerable. People sense that they can hurt them without facing retaliation, that they can pour out their frustrations onto them without fear of reprisal. The good person becomes a vessel for the projections, disappointments, and unresolved pains of others. This is visible everywhere, even from the earliest stages of life. Walk into any schoolyard, and you will notice that bullies rarely direct their venom at those who might strike back with equal force. Instead, they single out the quiet child, the one who avoids conflict, the one who may even try to respond with kindness. That child, in their innocence, becomes a canvas upon which cruelty paints itself. They are pushed, mocked, excluded, not because they deserve it, but precisely because they seem safe. Their goodness creates no threat, and therefore it invites violation. The same pattern repeats in adult life. Within the workplace, for example, there is always the employee who carries more than their share of burdens. They are reliable, agreeable, eager to help, and so tasks that others shirk inevitably find their way onto their desk. Their silence is mistaken for consent, their humility for weakness. Promotions bypass them, credit slips away, and yet they continue to give. Their goodness, instead of being celebrated, becomes exploited. Colleagues, superiors, even institutions, unconsciously sense that this person will not fight back, will not retaliate, and so they become the safe target for inequity. The family, too, is not immune from this dynamic. In many households, there is one member who absorbs the frustrations of others. Perhaps it is the child who quietly endures criticism without complaint, or the spouse who continually forgives, who bends so the family does not break. They are leaned upon heavily, precisely because they seem strong enough to carry the weight. Yet beneath that strength, wounds deepen. The one who never protests is often the one most deeply injured. To the outside world, these patterns may appear as weakness. After all, why not fight back? Why not resist the aggressor, demand recognition, or set boundaries with force? But here lies the profound misunderstanding. What is mistaken for weakness is, in fact, a different kind of strength. It is the strength to endure without becoming hardened. It is the strength to resist retaliation, to absorb hostility without reflecting it back into the world. There is immense power in restraint, but it is a power that goes unseen, uncelebrated, and therefore unappreciated by most. Consider for a moment the difference between the lion and the lamb. The lion commands fear, its roar keeping challengers at bay. But the lamb, vulnerable and defenseless, is the one most often harmed. Yet is it not the lamb that carries the deeper symbolic weight? Across cultures and myths, the lamb represents innocence, sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption. Its vulnerability becomes a mirror for humanity's violence, and through that vulnerability, something sacred is revealed. In much the same way, good people, by becoming safe targets, reveal the shadow side of those around them. They draw out the cruelty, the selfishness, and the unresolved pain that would otherwise remain hidden. Their suffering exposes the sickness of the environment in which they live. This does not mean that being perceived as a safe target is easy. On the contrary, it is a deeply painful role to inhabit, to be misunderstood, overlooked, or abused precisely because of one's goodness feels like a cruel injustice. Many good people, over time, learn to question themselves. Am I too soft? Am I foolish for caring? Should I become harder, colder, less open? These are natural questions born of suffering. Yet the danger lies in abandoning goodness altogether. For when the kind-hearted close themselves off in self-protection, something essential is lost, not only for them but for the world. To endure as a good person in a world that exploits gentleness is to live with constant tension. It requires discernment, the ability to see clearly without letting bitterness take root. It means learning to set boundaries without abandoning compassion, to recognize exploitation without becoming cynical. This is no small task. It is a work of inner strength, of spiritual resilience, and it is precisely this resilience that transforms what appears to be weakness into the greatest form of power. There is a quiet heroism in those who continue to act with kindness despite being used. There is nobility in the worker who continues to give their best even when their efforts are ignored. There is courage in the student who refuses to bully back, in the spouse who continues to love despite criticism, in the friend who remains loyal even after betrayal. These are not acts of weakness. They are acts of immense strength, for they resist the temptation to mirror cruelty. They interrupt the cycle of harm by refusing to return it. We see this most clearly in figures who have endured immense oppression. Think of those who, in the face of violence, chose nonviolence, who, in the face of hatred, chose forgiveness. History records them as extraordinary, yet their strength was born of the same paradox that confronts every good person in daily life. They were perceived as safe targets, attacked, imprisoned, mocked, and yet it was precisely in their refusal to retaliate that their true power emerged. What was seen as weakness became the very force that changed the world. For the ordinary good person, those who are not on the stage of history, but who live quietly among us, the same principle applies. Their willingness to endure, their refusal to mirror aggression, their persistence in kindness even when misunderstood, these qualities are not wasted. They create ripples, subtle but real, shaping families, workplaces, and communities. They plant seeds of trust and compassion in places otherwise barren. They reveal that goodness, though vulnerable, is not fragile. It can bend without breaking, absorb without collapsing, and forgive without forgetting its own worth. Thus, while the world may continue to see good people as safe targets, the truth is far deeper. They are not weak. They are reservoirs of extraordinary inner strength. Their suffering, though real, becomes a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. And in a world so easily seduced by power and aggression, their quiet resilience stands as a reminder that the greatest power often hides beneath the surface of what looks like fragility. Authenticity is one of the rarest qualities to be found in human beings, and yet it is one of the most deeply longed for. In a world where most people are trained from childhood to wear masks, to adjust themselves to the expectations of society, to suppress what is inconvenient in order to be accepted, the presence of someone who is utterly themselves can feel both liberating and threatening. To encounter a person who does not bend to the falsehoods of convention, but lives with coherence between inner truth and outer expression, is to be confronted with the possibility of freedom. And yet, that freedom, when seen through the eyes of those who still live in bondage to appearances, awakens envy, for what they see in the authentic individual is not only what they admire, but also what they lack. The authentic person radiates a kind of inner strength that cannot be faked. They do not need approval to confirm their worth, nor do they manipulate others to secure a sense of identity. They live in alignment with their values, even when such a path is difficult. To those who live behind masks, such a life is intolerable to behold, for it exposes the hollowness of pretense. Envy, in such cases, does not remain a silent discomfort. It often transforms into attack. It is easier to diminish the one who lives authentically than to dismantle the false self one has constructed. History offers us the clearest illustrations. Consider Mahatma Gandhi, who, armed with nothing but moral conviction and steadfast simplicity, stood against an empire. His authenticity, his refusal to adopt violence even in the face of violence, was not met with universal admiration. He was imprisoned, ridiculed, and ultimately assassinated. Or think of Martin Luther King Jr., whose dream of justice was inseparable from his deep spiritual authenticity. He, too, was despised, threatened, and finally silenced by violence. Why did such men, who embodied values the world claims to honor, peace, justice, love, draw so much hatred? Because their lives were mirrors. They revealed the hypocrisy of a society that proclaimed ideals it did not practice. Their authenticity forced others to see their own inauthenticity, and the sting of that revelation provoked hostility. Yet this dynamic is not limited to great leaders and public figures. It is lived daily in small and intimate ways in the lives of ordinary people. A co-worker who refuses to gossip becomes in time isolated from the group. Their silence in the face of malice does not inspire admiration but suspicion. Others may call them arrogant, aloof, or self-righteous, not because they are guilty of these things, but because their refusal to participate reveals the pettiness of the group. Or consider the friend who dares to speak the truth with honesty and care. Rather than being valued for their clarity, they are dismissed as too much or difficult. The very quality that makes them genuine is twisted into a fault. And then there is the forgiving soul, who chooses not to carry grudges but to release them. Instead of being admired for their strength, they are ridiculed as naive, as if forgiveness were a weakness rather than one of the highest forms of courage. Envy poisons perception. It distorts goodness into offense, authenticity into arrogance, honesty into rudeness. What is pure becomes corrupted in the minds of those who cannot bear to face their own masks. And here lies the tragedy. The authentic individual rarely seeks to provoke. They are not setting out to expose others. They are simply being themselves. But their very existence reveals the compromises and falsehoods around them, and that revelation is unbearable to those who have staked their identity on pretense. This conflict is not only external, it is also internal. Each of us has, at some point, encountered authenticity and felt its sting. Perhaps we met someone whose discipline revealed our laziness, or whose courage exposed our fear, or whose honesty uncovered our avoidance. In those moments we stood at a crossroads to learn from the example or to envy and attack it. Most people, lacking the humility to acknowledge their own shortcomings, choose the latter. Envy becomes a defense mechanism, a way of pushing away the discomfort of self-awareness. But envy, left unchecked, is not passive. It is destructive. It corrodes relationships, turning admiration into bitterness and closeness into rivalry. It creates conflict where there should be connection. And most tragically, it often targets those least deserving of harm. The authentic person becomes scapegoated, not because of their flaws, but because of their strengths. They are punished for being what others secretly wish they could be. To understand this dynamic more deeply, one must consider the nature of freedom. Authenticity is freedom, freedom from the tyranny of appearances, freedom from the endless need for validation, freedom from the fear of being disliked. And freedom is threatening to those who are enslaved. When someone chained sees another walk freely, the sight is intolerable. It does not simply inspire hope, it also provokes rage. If I am bound, why should you be free? The attack that follows is not truly against the person, but against the possibility of freedom they represent. And yet there is also hope in this truth. For while authenticity attracts envy and attack, it also plants seeds of transformation. Even those who lash out are, at some level, awakened by the encounter. The discomfort they feel, though denied and resisted, points to something real within them, their own longing for authenticity. Many resist that call their whole lives. But some, over time, allow the sting of envy to turn into the spark of aspiration. The authentic life becomes a beacon, not because it is perfect, but because it is true. This is why those who radiate authenticity must not allow the envy of others to extinguish their light. To withdraw, to hide, to shrink back into conformity for the sake of safety, is to abandon the very gift that the world most desperately needs. The attacks will come, yes. The misunderstandings, the jealousy, the isolation, all of these are the price of being real. But the alternative, to live inauthentically, is to betray oneself, and that betrayal is far more costly than the wounds inflicted by envy. The authentic life is never easy. It invites both admiration and hostility, both longing and resistance. It exposes shadows, awakens envy, and provokes attack. Yet it also liberates, inspires, and heals. The envy of others is not proof that authenticity is a mistake, but evidence of its power. Only what is true can stir the soul so deeply, whether toward resentment or toward growth. In the end, those who dare to live authentically stand as reminders of what is possible for all of us. They reveal the masks we wear, not to shame us, but to invite us into freedom. Their presence unsettles, but it also awakens. And though envy may distort their goodness into offense, the truth of their being remains untouched. For authenticity, once seen, cannot be unseen. It lingers in the mind, calling us back, again and again, to the possibility of living not as shadows of ourselves, but as who we truly are. Goodness, though often imagined as a soft and passive quality, carries within it a force that unsettles the very foundations upon which false structures of power are built. To be truly good is not simply to smile, to accommodate, or to avoid conflict. It is to stand as a living contradiction to cruelty, to dishonesty, and to injustice. This is why those who embody goodness so often find themselves attacked. Their presence alone disrupts the existing order, for they refuse to conform to the silent agreements that allow corruption to thrive. In every sphere of life, the good person, by choosing compassion over cruelty, fairness over corruption, truth over deception, awakens discomfort in those who profit from falsehood. And discomfort, when it threatens power, quickly transforms into hostility. We can see this dynamic even in the intimacy of family life. Families often maintain equilibrium by burying what is painful, by colluding in silence around abuse, neglect, or dysfunction. When one child, perhaps out of innocence or courage, dares to speak the truth, they are not welcomed as a liberator, but branded as the problem. The family, clinging to its fragile stability, would rather attack the truth, teller, than face the reality they expose. This child may be scapegoated, excluded, or shamed, not because they are wrong, but because they challenge the order that keeps others comfortable in their denial. In this way, goodness, which demands honesty, becomes a threat to the very people who need it most. The same dynamic plays out on the larger stage of institutions. In corporations, it is the employee who refuses to cut ethical corners, who insists on transparency, who challenges unfair treatment, that soon finds themselves isolated. Colleagues whisper that they are difficult. Managers label them not a team player, and opportunities begin to vanish. The irony is that this individual is doing what organizations claim to value: integrity, fairness, and responsibility. Yet, when those values clash with profit, image, or convenience, the one who upholds them becomes a liability. Their courage destabilizes the order that others have chosen to accept, and the order defends itself through attack. On the grand stage of society, this truth becomes unmistakable. History is filled with reformers, prophets, and visionaries who dared to speak the words that no one wanted to hear. They challenged oppressive systems, they exposed lies, they insisted that human beings deserved better. And almost without exception, they suffered for it. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth, which in truth meant teaching them to question authority. Joan of Arc was burned as a heretic for daring to claim divine inspiration outside the sanctioned order. More recently, leaders like Nelson Mandela spent decades in prison, not because they were criminals, but because their goodness destabilized a system built upon injustice. These individuals remind us that goodness is never neutral. It is a force that shakes what must be shaken. It is easy to underestimate how deeply people cling to the structures that surround them, even when those structures are unjust. Corruption, abuse, and deception are not maintained only by those who benefit directly from them. They are sustained by the silent complicity of the many who fear change. When a good person steps into this environment, their refusal to remain silent becomes intolerable. They disrupt the unspoken contract of denial. They are attacked not only by the powerful, but also by the ordinary, for both have invested in maintaining stability, however false it may be. What makes this reality even more painful is that good people rarely set out to provoke. They do not seek conflict for its own sake. Their challenge to the existing order arises naturally, simply from their refusal to compromise their values. They are not revolutionaries by ambition, but by necessity. To remain true to themselves, they cannot remain silent in the face of what is wrong, and so, without meaning to, they become disruptive. Their presence alone destabilizes what others have worked so hard to keep hidden. This disruption is threatening because change, though necessary, is rarely welcomed. Those who benefit from injustice cling to it fiercely, but even those who suffer under it often resist its unraveling. There is a strange security in what is familiar, even when it is harmful. The family prefers silence to confrontation. The workplace prefers complicity to exposure. The society prefers tradition to reform. The good person, by insisting on compassion, fairness, and truth, removes the veil of familiarity and forces all to face the reality beneath. And facing reality is one of the most difficult tasks human beings can endure. Yet goodness persists in doing this very thing because it cannot betray itself. It continues to reveal, to question, to stand firm, even when surrounded by hostility. This is why the suffering of good people carries such weight. Their wounds are not signs of weakness, but the scars of battle in a struggle most cannot even see. Their persecution reveals not their failure, but their strength. They suffer because they are dangerous, not in the sense of violence, but in the sense of exposing what others desperately wish to hide. We see this dynamic in everyday life as well. Think of the colleague who refuses to go along with discriminatory jokes, who instead confronts them with quiet dignity. They may not be celebrated for their courage. More often, they are excluded. Or consider the neighbor who insists that a community issue be addressed fairly, even when others would rather ignore it. They may be labeled as troublesome, as someone making too much of things. In these simple acts, goodness destabilizes the order, and the order responds with attack. There is a paradox in this truth. The world claims to admire goodness, to honor honesty, to uphold justice. Yet when these qualities appear in their purest form, they are treated as threats. The good person, by refusing to compromise, reveals the hypocrisy in these claims. They show that what society praises in words, it often despises in practice. The attacks they endure are the proof of this contradiction. And yet, in spite of the suffering, there is a profound meaning in the role good people play. Without them, false structures would remain unchallenged, corruption would go unchecked, and injustice would reign unopposed. It is precisely because goodness disrupts that it carries the power to transform. Those who dare to challenge the existing order, whether in families, workplaces, or societies, plant the seeds of change. They may not live to see the fruits of their labor, but their presence alters the ground upon which the future is built. Thus, the suffering of good people is not meaningless. It is the inevitable cost of refusing to betray truth. It is the mark of their disruptive power, the evidence that their light is strong enough to disturb the darkness. Though they are attacked, silenced, or cast aside, the echo of their courage lingers, and in time it is often those very attacks that reveal the depth of their significance. For the existing order, however stable it appears, cannot withstand the persistent challenge of goodness. Sooner or later, the truth breaks through. The world has always struggled to recognize the true face of strength. We are conditioned to equate power with force, authority with dominance, and resilience with aggression. In such a world, kindness often appears as an anomaly, a quality too delicate to survive the harsh winds of life. Yet this is a great misunderstanding, for the gentleness of the good is not a sign of fragility, but of profound inner mastery. A person who remains kind in the face of cruelty demonstrates a strength that the hostile spirit cannot even comprehend. It is easy to strike back when struck. It is far more difficult to hold one's ground in peace, to refuse to allow hatred to corrupt the soul. And because so few can understand this paradox, good people are often attacked, dismissed, and underestimated. The refusal to retaliate is mistaken for submission. The willingness to forgive is interpreted as naivety. The act of extending compassion is mocked as gullibility. These judgments do not reveal the weakness of the good person, but the blindness of those who look upon them. It is the blindness of a society that worships the loud, the violent, and the domineering while failing to recognize that true power lies not in the clenched fist, but in the open hand. This misinterpretation causes deep suffering for those who walk the path of goodness, for they are not only attacked by others, but also misjudged at the very core of their character. Consider the life of Nelson Mandela, who endured 27 long years behind prison walls. Many expected that such suffering would break him, that he would emerge hardened, bitter, consumed by the desire for revenge. Yet he emerged with a spirit that chose reconciliation over vengeance, dialogue over destruction. At the time, some interpreted his commitment to peace as weakness, as though forgiveness were a lesser path than retaliation. But it was this very refusal to be consumed by hatred that allowed him to reshape a nation. His kindness was not the absence of strength, but the highest form of it, a strength capable of bending the course of history. This pattern echoes in countless lives, both great and ordinary. Think of the quiet friend who remains present even after betrayal, not because they lack pride, but because their love is stronger than their wound. or the parent who sacrifices daily without complaint, holding together a household with patience that often goes unnoticed, or the teacher who continues to nurture and encourage despite repeated disrespect, never allowing bitterness to corrode their mission. These are not weak souls, though they may be treated as such. They are reservoirs of immense strength, their endurance forged not in anger but in love. Yet society rarely acknowledges such strength. Instead, it preys upon it. Those who are kind are often taken advantage of, as though their refusal to retaliate grants permission to exploit them. In workplaces, the employee who avoids confrontation is given the heaviest burdens. In friendships, the one who always forgives is the one most likely to be hurt again. In relationships, the partner who sacrifices without complaint may be dismissed as lacking boundaries. Such exploitation reveals more about the abuser than the abused. It exposes a profound spiritual weakness, a reliance on others' goodness to cover one's own lack of integrity. But the truth is this: kindness endures where cruelty collapses. The aggressor, in their pursuit of dominance, becomes enslaved to their own hostility. The good person, by refusing to sink to that level, remains free. This freedom is the essence of their power. It is why, even though they are attacked, they cannot be truly conquered. Their suffering may be visible, but their inner strength remains intact. Indeed, the very fact that kindness survives in a world so hostile to it is evidence of its indestructibility. This misunderstanding of kindness as weakness is also rooted in fear. To live with gentleness requires a courage most people do not possess. It demands vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to endure pain without immediately lashing out. Many fear such openness, for it exposes the rawness of the human heart. To cover this fear, they dismiss kindness as foolishness, thereby protecting themselves from confronting what they lack. The attack against the good is often an attack born of insecurity, a defense mechanism against the discomfort of being confronted with a higher standard of humanity. History is filled with examples of this paradox. Figures such as Mahatma Gandhi, who chose nonviolence in the face of empire, or Martin Luther King Jr., who met hatred with love, were labeled weak, naive, or idealistic by their critics. Yet it was their steadfast commitment to kindness that shook empires and awakened nations. Their strength did not reside in armies or weapons, but in the moral courage to remain true to love even when met with violence. And while they paid the price of suffering, their legacy stands as proof that kindness, far from being weakness, is the only strength capable of transcending hatred. On a more personal level, each of us has encountered moments when kindness is tested. We are betrayed by a friend and feel the urge to repay harm with harm. We are insulted and feel the heat of anger demanding expression. We are wronged in ways that cut to the bone, and our pride cries out for revenge. And yet, when we resist that impulse and choose instead to respond with dignity, we discover a power deeper than the satisfaction of retaliation. We discover that goodness can stand unshaken in the storm. This is the hidden strength of kindness. It does not need to destroy its enemy, for it already transcends the battlefield. The suffering of good people, then, is not a reflection of weakness, but of the world's inability to recognize their true strength. They are attacked precisely because their way of being unsettles the assumptions upon which society rests. If the world admits that kindness is stronger than aggression, then it must also admit that its worship of dominance is a lie. And so, to preserve the illusion, it labels kindness as weakness. This is the cost borne by those who embody goodness. They are misunderstood, underestimated, and exploited, even while they hold within themselves a power greater than any weapon. In time, however, this strength reveals itself, aggression exhausts itself, cruelty consumes its bearer, and domination collapses under its own weight. Kindness, though it may be dismissed, endures. The good person may suffer, but their spirit leaves an imprint that outlasts hostility. Long after the aggressor's victory has turned to dust, the endurance of kindness continues to inspire, to heal, and to guide. This is why the good, though they suffer more, are never truly defeated. Their strength is of a different order, one that does not merely survive the world, but transforms it from within. Good people suffer more social attacks, not because they are weak, but because they carry light into spaces where shadows prevail. Their kindness exposes hidden wounds, their authenticity challenges falsehoods, their courage unsettles unjust systems, and their refusal to hate disarms those who thrive on conflict. If you are such a person, do not mistake the attacks against you as signs of failure. Rather, they are proof that your presence matters. You disturb the comfortable lies of the world, and in doing so, you awaken its deeper truths. To be good is to walk a difficult road, but it is also the only road that leads to lasting transformation, both for oneself and for humanity.